My name is Norah Ellwood. I spent 18 months building an AI system that was supposed to protect people until the woman I once admired stole it and erased me from my own work. I was heartbroken, humiliated, and furious. But I didn't scream. I built a mirror, and I let the truth speak for me. Stay with me through the end of the story. Then tell me, did I do the right thing? Would you have stood still or struck back? I'm listening. I still remember that morning, first Monday of October, the year I truly believed I was on the verge of a promotion. Seattle was already cold, the kind of damp chill that settles into your bones. The glass of my office window had that faint fog on it, and from where I sat, I could see the main conference room where the leadership team had started to gather. I wasn't in the room. That wasn't unusual, not exactly. But that day, it felt different. The office at Argonis Systems was sleek, all brushed metal and matte black walls, but quiet in a way that didn't feel calm, more like tension suspended in air. You could hear every shoe click, every keyboard stroke. It was a place built to look modern but to feel like control. Celeste Morven walked in 5 minutes late, like always. She didn't rush, though. Celeste never rushed. She made an entrance, long camel coat still draped over one shoulder, phone in hand, a practiced smile on her face like a woman who knew exactly which angles the room would capture. I used to think she was the kind of woman I wanted to become. Back when she first joined Argonis, she'd taken me out to lunch her second week. It wasn't some mass team gesture, it was just her and me. She asked questions, real ones. About my background, about the early sketches of Sentinel Shield. She listened genuinely, or so I thought, and she said something like, "Women in tech need to make space for each other." I believed her. So when she started appearing more often in meetings about the project, I felt proud. I thought I was being seen. I thought she had my back. That morning, though, I started to feel the shift. I watched through the glass as she stood in front of the digital whiteboard, hair tied back neatly, dressed in her usual navy sheath dress, and those pointed heels she never seemed to trip in. The presentation was on our quarterly roadmap, mostly centered on Sentinel Shield. My project. Only, I wasn't mentioned. She walked the board through each module, threat mapping, behavior flagging, the AI ethics layer. She called it a collaborative vision and talked about a system that will define the future of secure corporate infrastructure. The way she spoke was almost hypnotic, confident, polished. Her slide deck had clean diagrams, even a visual metaphor I once used in a brown bag session. And then one of the directors, a guy from finance, I think, asked, "Who's leading the behavioral pattern engine development?" That's the most impressive piece, in my opinion. Celeste paused just a moment. "It's a strong team," she said, smoothing her skirt before continuing. "I've been personally guiding them through the integration. It's been rewarding." That was it. No names. No credit. Just a strong team. I looked down at the paper cup in my hands. My coffee had gone cold. I hadn't even noticed. My fingers tightened just slightly around it. Maybe she forgot. Maybe she was just playing it politically safe. But even as I tried to rationalize it, something inside me quietly rewound the last few weeks. How she'd stopped CCNG me on investor communications, how the meetings had become one-on-ones without me, how the version of Sentinel Shield I knew had subtly changed in language. Later that afternoon, while running a backup scan on our internal systems, I decided to do something I hadn't done in weeks. Check the access logs tied to the project's root server. There it was. A system-level command string run under a generic admin credential. Time-stamped from a Sunday evening, about 3 weeks earlier. It had accessed modules we hadn't made public yet. Ones I had stored in a private staging environment. The kind of access only I should have had. It was cleaned well. Most engineers wouldn't have noticed the reauthorization trail tucked between compression entries. But I knew how to read what wasn't meant to be seen. I closed the file. Didn't report it. Not yet. One of my old professors once told me, "Observe before you react." The most dangerous flaw in security isn't a hole in the system, it's human panic. So I didn't panic. I stayed late that night. Just me, the hum of the server room, and a line of code I'd written months ago but never activated. I refined it, tested it in a sandbox, and quietly installed it back into the Sentinel Shield testing environment. It wouldn't affect performance. It wouldn't alert anyone. But if someone tried to use my system as their own, it would mirror the commands and log every movement made through it. I named the file mirror_c.log. No one would notice it, but I would know. And from that moment, I stopped assuming Celeste Morven was someone I could admire. I started watching her for who she really was. I don't think anyone sets out to feel invisible. It just happens gradually. A string of moments that don't seem like much on their own, until one day you look around and realize you've been standing behind the curtain the entire time, while someone else takes the bow. That's what it felt like the week after that meeting. There was a company-wide email about our upcoming presentation at the tech conference. Celeste was listed as the speaker, of course. And under contributors, there were a few junior engineers, one product manager, and strategic oversight, Celeste Morven. My name wasn't there. Later that morning, one of the software analysts stopped me near the coffee station. He looked genuinely confused. "Hey, I thought you were co-lead on Sentinel Shield? Weird they didn't mention you in the announcement." I smiled, tight, polite. Must have been an oversight. But I felt it in my chest, like a pin pressing into soft fabric. Not painful, not yet, but enough to leave a mark. That afternoon, I took a walk to clear my head. There's this small cafe a few blocks from the office, the Lantern Brew. Warm lights, real ceramic mugs, none of that sterile tech campus vibe. I hadn't been there in months. As I pushed open the door, the bell overhead chimed, and I almost turned around. Sitting at the window, flipping through a notebook with her glasses half on, was Vera Klein. She used to be my manager back when I worked at Endura Tech years ago. One of the few people I'd ever met in the industry who talked about ethics without sounding like she was quoting a brochure. She'd left the corporate world after what she called a restructuring that stripped too many people of their names. I walked over. She looked up and smiled like we'd just seen each other last week. "Hey, stranger," she said, closing the notebook. "Still building things that scare people smarter than you?" "Trying," I laughed. We caught up over coffee. She told me she was consulting now, mostly with small nonprofits and universities. I told her vaguely that I was still in security architecture, left out the details about Argonis or Sentinel Shield. But Vera had always been sharp. She studied me mid-sip and said, "You're not just tired. You're holding something in." I shrugged, looked away. "It's nothing. I guess I'm just learning some things about people." She nodded slowly. "You working with someone who smiles too easily and forgets to mention your name when it matters?" I blinked. She leaned back. "I've seen that look before. 10 years ago. In the mirror." I didn't answer. But my silence was loud enough. Vera didn't press. That was one of the things I always admired about her. She never pulled feelings out of you like teeth. She just waited until you were ready to hand them over yourself. After a moment, she said, "If you're starting to feel like a tool instead of a teammate, you're probably not wrong. Good engineers have instincts, and when those instincts start humming, don't ignore them." She stirred the last bit of foam in her cup, then added, "Start backing things up. Now. Before you need to wish you had." I left the cafe with my stomach tight and my fingers tingling. Back at the office, I stayed late, told the front desk I was finishing up a patch review. Everyone else had already gone home, which made it easier to move quietly through the shared directories. I opened the internal development folder. Nothing unusual. Then I checked the archived presentation drafts. Buried inside a Google Drive folder marked Internal Prelim Review, I found a polished slide deck with the Argonis logo, color-coded graphs, and a title that made me sit back in my chair. Morven's Shield Initiative. I clicked through the deck slowly. Every major concept I'd contributed, risk mapping via behavioral flagging, predictive escalation analysis, and the modular AI audit trail, was there. Same wording, same visuals. But nowhere, not once, was I mentioned. Instead, each slide had a watermark in the lower right corner, prepared by C. Morven, Executive Summary. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just closed the laptop and sat there with my palms resting flat on the desk. Because that was the moment I knew. This wasn't a miscommunication. It wasn't a miss-CC or an internal reshuffle. It was a strategy. She wasn't forgetting me. She was erasing me. And that kind of thing didn't just happen. It was done. The email wasn't even sent to me. It came from Celeste's executive assistant, addressed to the senior leadership team. A summary of upcoming events, including a bullet point near the bottom that read, CEO Celeste Morven will be presenting the Sentinel Shield prototype at DEF CON this quarter. Strategic vision plus ethical AI applications in enterprise environments. I found out about it because Brad from DevOps forwarded it to me with a short note. Thought you might have already seen this, but weird that you weren't listed? Yeah, weird. I read the email twice. Not once did it mention the technical lead. Not once did it reference the architect behind the behavioral engine. No, in collaboration with or developed by. Just her. Her name, her vision, her headline. That afternoon, I asked her assistant to set up a quick one-on-one. The request was approved within the hour. The conference room she used for private meetings always smelled faintly of eucalyptus and power. Minimalist decor. No personal photos. Just glass, steel, and a long matte black table that felt colder than it looked. She was already seated when I walked in, tapping her pen rhythmically on a leather notebook. Hey, she said brightly. Sit. You look tired. I ignored the comment, pulled out a chair, and sat across from her. I wanted to ask about the DEF CON announcement, I said. I wasn't aware we were presenting so soon. She smiled, soft and diplomatic, the way people smile when they're already prepping their exit from the conversation. We're seizing the momentum, she said. It's the perfect time. And you know this project better than anyone. You've done incredible work. Then why wasn't I included in the announcement? I asked. Why is the ethical module attributed to your name in the draft deck? She tilted her head, just slightly, like I'd asked something naive. Norah, I know how this might look, but this is about optics. Investors, partners, they don't remember who coded what. They remember who stood at the podium and sold the vision. I didn't respond right away. I looked down at her notebook, noticed the page had key talking points scrawled in neat bullet form. The words Sentinel Shield were underlined twice. So, I'm supposed to disappear now? I said finally, my voice low. Not at all, she said, voice warm, almost maternal. You're vital. But we're at a stage where visibility needs to be consolidated. Too many voices muddies the brand. And consolidating means removing the person who built the foundation? She gave a small sigh, like she was talking to someone being overly dramatic. Then she leaned in slightly and said, We're going into high-stakes pitching. I need you to take a temporary step back from technical operations, just for a few weeks, to avoid confusion about leadership structure. There it was. Not a firing, not a demotion, but a quiet exile. A decision dressed up as a strategic pause. I didn't argue. I didn't ask what I was supposed to do during that time. I just nodded, thanked her for the transparency, and walked out. When I got back to my floor, I scanned my badge at the server room. Red light. I tried again. Still red. I went to my desk and tried to remote in. My access credentials had been downgraded. I couldn't even view the project's backend logs. Everything I had architected was now behind a wall I hadn't built. I called IT. They redirected me to HR. HR said, It's a temporary restriction requested by executive leadership to maintain data integrity during a sensitive rollout phase. Sensitive rollout phase. I repeated. Right. After I hung up, I sat still for a moment. Not angry. Not even shocked anymore. I had seen this coming. So I did the only thing I could. I retrieved the last external backup drive I kept in the locked drawer of my desk, the one I hadn't touched since last quarter. I plugged it in, copied everything that was mine. Not company property. Not source code. Just logs. Drafts. Notes. Then I opened a terminal and logged into a separate test instance I had buried weeks ago. The one no one had access to but me. I scrolled through the hidden logs connected to the mirror_seed protocol. There it was. Clear as daylight. Celeste's credentials had accessed the mirrored environment. She had pulled the module and used my predictive ethics layer in her demo build. She didn't just hijack the project. She hijacked me. But what she didn't know, what she would never see coming, was that Sentinel Shield had already started doing its job. Quietly. Automatically. Not protecting her. Tracking her. And all I had to do now was wait. The morning after I got locked out of my own system, I didn't vent. I didn't post cryptic messages. I just typed out one line and hit send. Do you have time for coffee this week? I need your perspective. Vera replied in 10 minutes, as if she'd been expecting it. Lantern brew. Noon tomorrow. No emojis. No fluff. Just the woman I trusted most in this industry giving me a time and a place. When I walked into the cafe, she was already there. Back corner booth, latte half gone, a folder of printed case studies open in front of her like she'd just stepped out of a classroom. Her blazer was draped over the seat beside her, and she looked calm, almost too calm. She glanced up, then nudged the chair across from her out with the side of her foot. I sat down. This time, there was no need to ease in. I told her everything. Not the polite version. Not the professional summary. The real thing. I told her how I came in one morning and found every access, credentials stripped like I'd never existed. How the behavioral engine I spent a year fine-tuning had reappeared under Celeste's name in internal files, rebranded, retitled, and just sanitized enough to look like a product of leadership initiative. I told her about the mirror_seed log I'd buried months ago, how it had quietly started capturing patterns, who was touching what, and when. Vera didn't ask questions. She just listened. The way good engineers do, like she was running diagnostics in her head, quietly logging every detail. When I finished, she closed the folder in front of her. Took a slow sip from her cup. You're calm, she said, almost like an accusation. I shrugged. There's no room for anything else right now. She nodded slowly. That's good. You'll need that stillness. If you want to outplay someone like Celeste, don't hit her head on. Let your code speak. Let the systems say what you can't. Her words landed deeper than I expected. That night, I went back into the local environment of Sentinel Shield, the buried testbed tucked inside an old server instance nobody had bothered to clean out. The code was dated, imperfect, but the bones were strong. The logging engine still worked. The behavioral tagging engine, the ethics score, it was all there. Ghost code, alive and waiting. I didn't touch production. Didn't trigger alarms. All I did was launch a passive monitor, silent, internal, reading leadership-level data streams. No flags, no alerts. Just watching. It took 43 minutes to come online. Once it was running, I logged out. And I didn't tell a soul. I didn't write it in a notebook. But I did leave something behind. A sticky note, hidden beneath a folded napkin from Lantern Brew, taped to the underside of my desk drawer. It read, "If the righteous fall 7 times, they rise again." Proverbs 24 verse 16. It wasn't for them. It was for me. The following days passed like any others. I came into the office, nodded politely in meetings, kept my head down. Technically, I was on a strategic reassignment. Informally, I was in limbo. Celeste barely acknowledged me. She passed by my desk a few times, always on her phone, always with that air of efficient distraction, like nothing outside her immediate orbit could register. If she suspected anything, she didn't show it. But then, on a Thursday afternoon, the log pinged. The monitor flagged 2 executive accounts accessing archived Sentinel Shield data and cross-referencing it with financial records. At first, I thought it might be benign. Then the tags came in. Unauthorized edits to expense documentation. IP conflict between sessions. Metadata mismatch in external filing. And then, the final entry hit. Draft patent submission. Applicant, C. Morven. Claim. Ownership of modular AI system for ethical behavior monitoring. My system. Word for word. Logic structure. Use cases. Even the language I'd used in my private build notes. She wasn't just running with my idea. She was trying to make it hers. Legally. Permanently. I didn't yell. Didn't cry. My fingers hovered over the trackpad, still and deliberate. I took a screenshot. Then encrypted the logs. Made 3 copies, one for Vera, one for myself, and one buried deep in a third-party cloud vault, under credentials no one at Argonis would ever uncover. I stared at the screen, and my pulse didn't even spike. I felt cold. Not in a detached way, just focused. A clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I don't need revenge, I whispered. I just need the truth to do its job. I leaned back in my chair, listened to the low hum of the server fan under the desk. It sounded like breath, like rhythm. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was documentation. And documentation? That's how people like me win. I didn't book a flight to San Francisco. I didn't pack a blazer or prepare a pitch deck. I didn't even RSVP. Instead, I sat in my apartment with my laptop open, a mug of oversteeped tea going cold beside me. The DEF CON Tech Conference was live-streamed through a partner media outlet. All I had to do was click the link. When the feed loaded, Celeste was already on stage. She looked the part, sharp gray dress, mic pinned to her lapel, smile rehearsed but polished. Behind her, the Argonis Systems logo spun slowly on the screen, paired with the phrase, "The future of ethical AI and security." I leaned back in my chair, one foot tucked under the other. My hand hovered near the keyboard, not to stop anything, but just to steady myself. Celeste launched into her presentation like she was born for it. Today, she said, we're proud to introduce Sentinel Shield, a proactive, ethics-driven AI framework built to detect and prevent organizational misconduct before it escalates. She didn't stumble over a word. She never mentioned my name. Then came the live demo. She gestured toward the screen and said, let's take a look at how Sentinel Shield monitors internal behavior patterns in real time. She tapped the tablet in her hand, triggering the simulation. Except it wasn't a simulation. The screen behind her lit up with a real-time network map, Argonis Systems' actual internal traffic. A moment passed. Then lines of flagged behavior logs began appearing on the right side of the display. One by one, red tags popped up. Executive access override detected. Conflict of interest. Flagged transaction history. IP theft warning. Duplicate submission found in external patent registry. User ID. Morven@argonis.com. A silence fell over the crowd. Then, bold red letters scrolled across the screen like they'd been waiting for their cue. Primary anomaly source. Celeste Morven. Celeste froze. She turned, stared at the screen, then quickly tried to swipe the feed off her tablet, but the display was mirrored and streaming across the venue's main hall. Every attendee, every camera, every investor watching remotely, all of them saw it. She stammered something into her mic, fingers fumbling over the controls. This appears to be a test environment. There must be a misfire in the sandbox. But the data kept flowing. I didn't activate it. That's what made it clean. I'd built Sentinel Shield to respond to unauthorized system behavior autonomously. The mirror_seed protocol wasn't sabotage, it was accountability. If someone accessed the ethics module and tried to misrepresent ownership or suppress internal violations, the system escalated automatically, just as it was designed to do. All I had done was let it breathe. Watching it unfold, I didn't feel triumphant. My hand trembled slightly, and I had to set the mug down before I dropped it. I just kept thinking this wasn't revenge. It was alignment. A system reflecting the truth of the people using it. That's what I'd built it to do. By the time the stream was cut, the room on screen had devolved into a blur of shifting bodies, muted voices, and staff rushing to disconnect the feed. The chat panel beside the live stream was exploding. Industry reporters, cybersecurity experts, former clients. The damage was done. Within an hour, Argonis stock took a hit. By evening, 2 investor meetings were reportedly canceled. By midnight, I received an email from legal counsel, Argonis Systems. Subject, Sentinel Shield IP. Urgent discussion request. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I closed my laptop and sat still in the quiet of my living room, blinds half drawn, city lights bleeding through the slats. I thought about all the times I'd stayed late building the foundations of that system. All the second guesses I'd swallowed. The praise that never came. The pride I'd tucked into silence. And then I thought of Celeste, on stage, beneath the spotlight she'd fought so hard to control, only to be undone by the very transparency she claimed to champion. I murmured under my breath, I didn't have to ruin her. I watched the dark screen in front of me reflect my own face, calm, tired, unshaken. I just let the truth run its course. The law office in Bellevue had the kind of silence that made even the air feel rehearsed. Everything was cold and clean, walls dressed in framed diplomas, brushed chrome fixtures, white orchids that looked like they'd never known sunlight. Even the carafe of water on the table sat untouched, its condensation dripping slowly, like a metronome. I sat at one end of the long conference table, back straight, hands folded loosely on a legal pad I hadn't written a word on. Across from me were two lawyers from Argonis. One looked barely 30, sweating behind his collar. The other was older, calm, unreadable, a man who had likely negotiated 100 cases with half his face behind a poker expression. "We're hoping to resolve this quietly," the older one said. "No press, no litigation. It's not beneficial to either party to escalate." I nodded once, keeping my voice level. "That's good. Because I'm not here to escalate." They both relaxed slightly. "I'm here to correct a theft." The younger man stiffened. "I want 50% ownership of Sentinel Shield," I said, calm as if I were reading the weather. "A permanent voting seat on the board. And $10 million in restitution. $6 million for the value of the technology, for personal damages, legal costs, and defamation." There was a pause long enough for me to hear the air vent click on overhead. "That's a substantial request," the older one replied. "So is stealing intellectual property and trying to rewrite history," I said. They didn't push back. They asked for 3 days. I gave them 10. And during those 10 days, I took walks. I avoided screens. And I met with Vera. We walked along Lake Washington, bundled in scarves, our coffees growing cold faster than we could drink them. Wind off the water made our cheeks sting, but neither of us seemed to mind. "You're standing at the edge of something people spend their whole lives avoiding," Vera said, watching a family of ducks glide between the reeds. "They think justice looks like a firestorm. You're about to prove it can look like still water." I didn't answer right away. "Do you think I'm going too far?" She shook her head, slow and sure. "No. You're not burning a bridge. You're reclaiming what never should have been taken from you in the first place." 10 days later, I got the call. Argonis' executive board had convened an emergency session. Internal leaks had shaken investor confidence. Celeste had been placed on indefinite leave. They didn't have the leverage to bluff anymore. They asked me to return for final negotiation. But when I walked into the neutral boardroom they'd reserved for the meeting, there were no lawyers. There was only Celeste. She stood as I entered, but she didn't hold her usual posture. She looked smaller somehow. Her suit was gone, replaced by a soft gray blouse, flats instead of stilettos. She looked human. Tired. Even her eyes had lost their edge. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said, her voice hoarse around the edges. I said nothing. She took a seat slowly, folded her hands together in a way that made me realize they were shaking. "I made a mistake," she started. "Several, actually. I thought I could control the story. I thought I could take the bones of what you built and make them bigger, shinier. Something I could sell." I didn't move. "I didn't think you'd push back," she admitted, her voice nearly a whisper now. "That was the real mistake." I held her gaze for a long time. Then finally, "You didn't underestimate me. You just believed no one would ever listen to me over you." That hit something. Her shoulders twitched, her mouth tightened. It was small, but it was there. She looked down. "I accept your terms." I nodded. "Good. But there's one more condition." She looked up, warily. "I'm not signing anything until Argonis agrees to establish a new internal governance protocol. Sentinel Shield was never meant to be a weapon for ambition. If it's going to live on, it needs to be surrounded by people who understand what it's for." Her eyes narrowed slightly. Not in anger, more in disbelief. Like that was the one thing she hadn't predicted. "You're not trying to ruin me," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "You're not worth that much of my energy." She flinched. Then she stood, gathered her bag, and walked out of the room. I stayed behind, watching the rain smear the windows into soft, shapeless streaks. Not heavy rain, just that Seattle kind of rain that lingers, washing the last of whatever was clinging to the sidewalks. I didn't feel like I'd won anything, but I'd reclaimed what mattered. The truth. My voice. And the quiet kind of power that comes from knowing no one will ever write me out of my own story again. The conference room at Argonis HQ looked different that morning. Same furniture, same walls, but the energy had shifted. Maybe it was the way people looked at me when I walked in, like they didn't quite know where to place me anymore. I wasn't just the engineer who used to sit quietly 2 floors down. I wasn't the ghost in the machine anymore. They called it a special internal session, a formality before the board finalized the restructuring and reissued the Sentinel Shield rollout under new governance. They asked me to present a revised roadmap. But what I brought wasn't a pitch. I connected my laptop to the main screen, stood in front of the long table, and let the silence settle before I spoke. I don't have slides, I said. Just this. One file opened, a full system diagram of Sentinel Shield. Every core module, every logic string, every line of infrastructure written in my own syntax. The timestamp logs were still intact, documenting the long stretch of nights, weekends, and revisions that had built the backbone of the platform. Some of them stretched back 18 months. I zoomed in on one portion and tapped the touchpad. This block? I wrote that after a 12-hour shift, the night our deployment window crashed.
No one asked me to stay.
No one noticed I did. But it was the only way we hit the deadline. I glanced at the room. People weren't blinking. A few were leaning in. This system wasn't created in boardrooms. It wasn't designed by committee. It was written, one piece at a time, by someone who cared more about the consequences of its use than the glory of its launch. I didn't say her name. I didn't need to. I believed for a long time that the best way to succeed was to keep my head down and let the work speak for itself. That's what we're told, right? Especially women in tech. Don't be too loud. Don't ask for credit. Don't make things uncomfortable. I let that settle. I also believed, I continued, that women could help each other rise. I still believe that. Just not with everyone. I looked toward the back of the room, where Vera sat, arms folded, her eyes soft but steady. That alone gave me the strength to keep going. This system, Sentinel Shield, was never meant to be about branding. It was built to be a mirror. And mirrors don't lie. They reflect what's already there. So, the next time anyone here thinks about taking credit for something that isn't theirs, I hope they remember that a system like this is watching. The room was quiet. Not awkward quiet. It was the kind of stillness that comes from people realizing they're seeing something they won't forget. I'm not staying on as an executive, I said finally. I don't want the power seat. I don't need a corner office or a title. That surprised a few of them. But I will remain a co-founder. And I'll continue to oversee ethical enforcement protocols under the board's purview. There was a pause before the chairman nodded slightly. That was all I needed. As long as the system carries my name, it will stand for integrity. Nothing less. After the meeting, someone, I think it was the head of strategy, asked if I wanted to sit in on the press prep. I politely declined. On my way out, I paused in the lobby. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the familiar tug of tension behind my ribs. I didn't feel like I had to watch my back or measure every word. Vera caught up with me at the elevator. She didn't say anything right away. Just slipped one arm around me and held me for a second longer than expected. Then she whispered, "You didn't win because you had more power. You won because you told the truth. And no one can take that from you." 2 days later, the rebranding was announced. Sentinel Shield would now be known internally and externally as the Ellwood Protocol. It didn't make headlines in the way a scandal does, but it echoed in the right places. In academic journals. In private tech circles. In the emails I received from young engineers who wrote, "I didn't know someone like me could do this." I didn't respond to all of them, but I read every single one. And every time I saw that name, Ellwood Protocol, I remembered exactly why I started. It had been almost a month since the boardroom. Seattle was doing what it did best, drizzling a slow, steady kind of rain that turned the sidewalks dark and made everything outside the window blur like a watercolor. I sat at my usual corner in the lantern brew, hands wrapped around a ceramic mug, watching droplets gather and fall from the awning. My laptop was closed. My phone was off. A small notebook sat open in front of me, a line scribbled across the page in ink still a little smudged. I didn't win a war. I ended one that should never have started. I meant it. Celeste had vanished from the public eye not long after the rebranding. There were no lawsuits, no criminal charges, just silence. The kind that makes people uncomfortable because it doesn't come with a headline or a closure. Wired ran a brief story. Celeste Morven resigns amid internal ethics breach. A quiet end for someone who had once walked into every room, like she owned the air in it. That, more than anything, told me how much damage had been done. And yet, I didn't feel angry. Not anymore. Last week, I got an email from a professor at the University of Washington. They'd seen the Ellwood protocol rollout and wanted to know if I'd be open to teaching a course, not on coding, not on systems architecture, but on something they called applied AI ethics and responsibility. The invitation made me pause. Not because I didn't feel qualified, but because it was the first time in a long while someone had asked me to share my mind without trying to take something from it. I said yes. And when I hit send, I smiled. Not wide, not dramatic, but real. That afternoon, Vera met me at the cafe. We didn't speak much at first. Just sat, shoulder to shoulder, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. After a while, she said quietly, "When it happened to me, I left." I couldn't see a way forward that didn't feel like compromise. I looked at her and shook my head. "You didn't lose." She gave a soft, almost tired laugh. "Maybe not. But you figured out how to leave without losing the part of yourself that mattered most."
I thought about that.
Then I said, "I figured it out because I saw what happens when you don't." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, just once. Then we let the quiet settle again. When I got home later that evening, I pulled out the little leather-bound notebook my mother had given me years ago. One of those small ones with an elastic strap, full of old notes and verses I'd long since memorized. I flipped to the first page. "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Exodus 14 verse 14. She used to whisper that to me when I was a teenager, whenever life got loud or confusing. Back then, I misunderstood it. I thought it meant silence, obedience, surrender. Now I know it means something else entirely. Stillness doesn't mean weakness. It means knowing who you are so deeply, so clearly, that no amount of noise can shake it loose. It means refusing to be moved by manipulation, by power plays, by fear dressed as authority. It means standing when others expect you to shrink. It means walking out of the room with your head up, even if no one claps. I looked out the window one more time. The rain was letting up. Somewhere across town, someone was probably booting up Sentinel Shield. No, the Ellwood protocol, for the first time under its rightful name. I didn't need to see it happen. I already knew the system worked. I already knew the truth held. I closed the notebook, slid it back into the drawer where it belonged, and sat back in my chair. I didn't need to shout to be heard. I just needed to stand still and never step back. Before we close, I just want to say this. Maybe you've been in a place like I was. Overlooked, undervalued, made to feel small by someone you once trusted. And maybe you didn't know what to do with all that silence. If this story speaks to something in you, I hope it reminds you, you don't have to shout to be strong. You don't have to fight to be worthy. Sometimes, standing your ground with quiet truth is the loudest thing you can do. Have you ever faced a moment like that? If this story moved you, I'd love for you to stay with me, to hear the next one. Maybe we'll make sense of these hard lessons together.